I'm extremely happy to be here, and I consider it a great honor to be with the academic community at the Sanskrit University, giving this talk, Dalit Bandhus talk. So I have been orphaned by the colleagues over here. Chairperson Shiba, Francis, Unnikrishnan Sithara, Honorable Vice Chancellor M.V. Narayanan, Professor Sasari, Mr. Sajid Joseph, Joseph John Kitra, Catherine Gemma, Miss Mr. Kumaran, and the faculty members of the department, Abhilash, and of this university. So I'm thankful to the organizers for this occasion. So when I was asked to be here as part of this, I told Francis that probably I can reflect on a few questions that are related to historiography rather than actually going to all this, very humongous sort of writings that we have, the writings of Dalit Bandhus, which actually is a very laborious task to go through. I should initially say that some of these works that are familiar to me as a researcher and reader, as a student of history, some of these works are familiar to me, and also the kind of methodology that Dalit Bandhus had used, that is also in a way familiar, but it is challenging. So my idea was actually to let me go back to the first. Yes. So I just titled it as Historiographies and Public Histories in the context of Dalit Bandhus' writing. So the idea is to not to really go through each of the texts which he authored. So I have with me, for example, the text Dalavakulam. I'm extremely glad that Ms. Sithara has actually gone through much of that and cleared the ground to talk about the significance of that sort of a text, which actually dismantles quite a variety of ideas related to how the history of an event could be written. So this will take us as students of history, those of us in modern history, can reflect on the annal historians who talk about event histories, even Messale, as they call in French. I don't know if I have put it correctly, but the idea is to actually think about the events. But Sithara had invited our attention to the fact that it's not something that had happened in 1805, but then take us back in time. So there is a genealogy to that particular thing, and probably one may think about that particular event. Even as we talk about it, we may want to think about it as something which evolves in the long duration, something which evolved in the long period of time of caste oppression. Then you have the background of the Buddhist history and all that. So the point is that some of these issues, whether we talk in terms of long term or in the short term as events, they do weave a certain kind of relationship with the existing historiographies. So I want just to open up this for a sort of dialogue on Dalit Bandhus kind of engagement with history, and then connect this with quite a number of issues which have cropped up in the last few decades, to which our attention has been drawn by, for example, one article which Professor Deepesh Chakrabarty wrote sometime back, which is in fact a reflection on the question of public history, an argument out of India. This was titled like that. So then we have in 2016 another article by historian Janaki Nair, which was in the context of the textbook controversy that erupted. Maybe it goes back to a little early in time, to early 2000s, when historians based at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata, responding to the kind of public debate on history. I think at that point of time it was the BJP government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So there used to be a lot of discussions about the textbooks being written. So there was this whole question of controversies developing, and then subsequently it became a certain kind of engagement with historians at the center and school teachers in the city of Calcutta and other places. But it was a very small group of concerned people talking about some kind of public history. And this engagement and the subsequent revision of NCERT textbook and so on, which led to the controversy, which Professor Janaki Nair wrote as an article in History Workshop Journal in 2016, which is what which is about the public lives of Indian history. So these two articles actually open up a certain kind of issue that remain very relevant today. So I don't want to go into the details of that, what is happening to this history as of now. So we know that it has become really terrible now. We may have a very quick look at this. Is a kind of textbook kind of invitation, one can say, but there's nothing substantial about it. But I just want to give a few familiar examples here to talk about different historiographies, broadly referring to different traditions in history writing. I don't have much time to go into the details of that. So here is a snapshot of different kind of historiographies that are dominant. ഇപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ നമ്മൾ വിവിധ തരത്തിലുള്ള ഹിസ്റ്റോറിയോഗ്രാഫീസിൽ ഒന്ന് പരിചയപ്പെടുത്തുകയാണെങ്കിൽ എന്തായിരിക്കാം സ്ഥിതി എന്ന് കാണിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ്. So you have this nationalist sort of historiography, then the colonial Marxist, subaltern, feminist, Dalit, post-colonial, or a certain kind of historiography which will talk about decolonial historiography. ഇപ്പോൾ വ്യത്യസ്തങ്ങളായിട്ടുള്ള ചരിത്ര രചനാ രീതികൾ നിലനിൽക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. So all of them claim a space in the public domain. We all know that. And there are different versions of those historiographies doing their round in our society, not just in academia. Now here in this, if I, there are articles that I have already referred to, particularly of Professor Chakrabarty, 2008 article on public lives of history, an argument out of India, where he talks about the need for thinking through the kind of histories that we do in the universities. And this is the right moment to think about that, because we are in the history department. And what happens to the history we do here? Is it consequential? This is a question which he asked. But this is a question which, when Chakrabarty asked, was actually reverberating the kind of debates that had been taking place in India, not just in fact in India, because if ever you get a chance to read this article, you will soon realize that he actually develops this, drawing on the writings of a number of scholars, including John Scott, Thomas Holt, also from the US or broadly from the Western context, and also the native Australian historians, not just the Australian black historians, but we get Australian white historians also who join those debates to talk about the questions of indigeneity in the Australian context. So what I want to suggest is that so we have a variety of histories of that kind. Now, what impact does the history that we do in our institutions, Department of Histories and universities have with this sort of histories, the other kinds of histories which would be doing their round in the public domain? So this is the central question. Now, in the example that we have here in the writings of Dalit Bandhus N.K. Jose, so we have his 106 published books. Some of them were old ones, some of them were subsequently, relatively new. And now, for example, in 1982, he published the first edition of Pule Lehra. Now, this is a very interesting book because I think it was in 1979 that the late T.H.P. Chandarasheri published the biography of Ayyangali, late 70s, 79 I guess, that was the year of publication of that book. And then there were quite a few books of that kind, broadly, mainly biographies of, the leaders of 20th century Dalit movements have been published by these authors. Now, what was the kind of, a reception which was already referred to in our group here? What was the response, or what kind of impact or reception that academic historians gave to these books? I don't know if there was much of a transaction between the kind of writing that that I just mentioned, the example of Pule Lehra, the text. I'm not pretty much sure whether they had a great reception in the academia. But students who were doing their post-graduation or MPhil at that point of time, those from the oppressed caste background probably took some interest in reading this sort of stuff. And I don't think that those books were ever found entry into the syllabi, curriculum and all that. It was still not happening in that way. So therefore, if you want to ask this question of the public history, if you take that notion, I will come to that in a minute. What exactly is public history in this context? Now, we have this example of Dalit Bandhu writing a certain kind of history, which I refer to as public history. So, we can take any number of examples, his own kind of writings on Vaikam Satyagraha, or this little bit controversial book, Poigil Yohanan Upadeshi. This is how he titled that book. അത് സഭയിൽപ്പെട്ട ആളുകളെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം കുറച്ച് പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാക്കിയ ടൈറ്റിലാണെന്ന് ദലിത് ബന്ധു തന്നെ പറഞ്ഞ് ഞാൻ കേട്ടിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പം ഒരു പ്രത്യേക രീതിയിലുള്ള ഒരു പൊതു ചരിത്രത്തിൻ്റെ പ്രൊഡക്ഷൻ, കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് കൺസ്ട്രക്ഷൻ ഓഫ് എ സർട്ടൻ കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് ഹിസ്റ്ററി ദാറ്റ് വേ. സോ കൺസ്ട്രക്ഷൻ ഓഫ് ഹിസ്റ്ററി is a term which Janaki Nair had used in this particular history workshop article that I have referred to. So therefore, without going too much into this, I want to draw your attention to the fact that here is a question which is opened up in the public domain. And then we are asking this particular question how does the academic community, or how does the practicing historians respond to this? What is the kind of response that practicing historians had, or professional historians had, to this sort of history? So this is the first question, or probably one of the important questions that I wanted to ask. Now, alongside this, part of the other historiographies, we have vernacular histories. Histories or the kind of historical texts written in vernacular languages. So, people have been analyzing those histories as well. Then we have redemptive histories. In the sense that a certain kind of historical practice, writing of history of certain experiences, maybe of sufferings or oppression, etc., act like a therapeutic kind of thing. And we have quite a number of global examples. So I just mentioned one particular thing of this. History as confession, the case of South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work, and we do hear about the demand for similar kind of exercises whereby testimonies could really travel back as history, or if not traveling back, when you give testimonies, these testimonies could be used to really critically engage with the production of history, certain kind of received notions about history. So therefore, what I want to draw your attention to is different varieties of history that really one can talk about. So we may, if we have time at the end of it, we can have a discussion on these different historiographies. And my argument is that all of them, become at some point of time public histories. And there, our concern is to see what happens to the history that we do in our classrooms. What happens to that particular history? Does it ever become part of the public public history? So, so public history, how do we, define it? I just draw on Professor Chakrabarty's definition of that. So he has said in this article, The Public Life of History and Argument Out of India, Postcolonial Studies, a journal in which it was published. There's a typos and I'm sorry for that. So history and historians assuming adjudicating role when disputes emerge in the domain of popular culture and democracies. This is what happens. Now there is another side to this. If you, those who are familiar with historians like Carlo Ginzburg, where he talks about the methodology of historians. Now, there's a very interesting argument about comparing the job of historians with that of the job of a judge. Now, we all know that the business of judges are a really problematic lot, at least at this point of time. When I guess in an academic forum we can say this, not as much as it is not safe to say this outside. So they are a very terrible lot as we know them. So they pronounce, their judgments. In all these cases, we are suffering because of many of these judgments of our, starting from CJI onwards. So what happens now is that historian also does the same kind of stuff, but then he stops short of making judgments. This is what Carlo Ginzburg said. And now the question is, in India, so the public history, those who thought about it, this is not my argument. So this has been well said by other historians. I just repeat that. They say that, so this is adjudicated either in the courtrooms, or even these days I think there are vigilant groups that decide whether it is archaeology or not. We are seeing that in Ganwapi case and many other cases. You can let loose, really good archaeologists, they come with their spade, or if they are not very patient, they can come with their JCB and do their excavation. And so we have these highly qualified archaeologists of that kind. And do they care for the history that we teach? We have wonderful archaeologists, really good archaeologists in India, doing kind of academic work. And what is their kind of situation? What happens to that archaeology? What happens to academic history that we teach in our universities? We do research in that, and what happens to that? So can this history have a public life when the public actually debates the past? This is a question. And unfortunately, we know that this is not having that kind of attraction. We do all this. There was a charge that at some point of time, certain kind of histories have been left out. I'm not pretty much sure whether it is true now, because we have had a varieties of alternative histories. Historians have been talking about feminist histories, subaltern histories, or the history of the working class, peasantry, and all that. At least since 1980s, I've been hearing this, reading about it, doing a little bit of research of my own in that way. So there is, in the sense that we have been influenced by a variety of radical historiographies, at least since the late 70s onwards. So therefore, things were happening. But then, why is it that this is not really influencing the way history being really managed at the street level? Because it has happened in a very big way in India. It is still happening almost every day. The banning of books. I don't want to go into the details of that. Many reputed scholars have suffered this in many ways. So therefore, it takes us back to these times of enthusiasm for history. Which, I just follow the arguments of Deepak Chakrabarty. He took us. He really invites our attention to 1920s and 30s, when a great deal of histories used to be written. But it has when I think about this in fact has an earlier kind of existence in the argument of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, when he said that this is repeated in one of the articles of Ranjit Guha. It's a historiography for India. In Indian historiography for India, there's an article like that. So where that one begins by saying, quoting Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who said that we all should write history. So this is in the late 19th century, when there was this whole idea of history gripping the educated elite of Bengal. They said that we all need to write our history. Then it has got its own kind of, not necessarily related to what Bankim Chandra Chatterjee said. It happens without being read by, without the intellectual lineages tracing back to Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. Here in this part of the world, we have a person like Poigel Johanan, who said that we should have our own written history. So he talks about, in his own context, the context of the oppressed class communities of southern part of Kerala, Travancore region. He said that we should have our own history. That history has to be a written history. So therefore, what I am saying is that in the 19th century, late 19th, early 20th century, there is a real demand for history. So this you may connect with the kind of research which people like Jaduna Sarkar and others have been doing. So we have this extremely qualified kind of scholars writing from Western India, Maharashtra, Pune, that area, Bhandarkar, subsequently, has been fruitioned as Bhandarkar Institute, but then that was a time when Bhandarkar himself was active and writing. So the idea was to write more about, more of scientific history. This is the point I want to say. So people were thinking that they were writing scientific history. Jaduna Sarkar from Bengal, who worked on using Marathi materials, not necessarily, but there was a controversy about whether he could read Modi's script and write Maratha history of Shivaji and many others of that kind. So there is a big controversy. But then Jaduna Sarkar was saying that he was writing scientific history. So putting together all this at one point of time, this debate was going on among the educated upper elites of both Western India as well as Eastern India, Bombay, Calcutta. So they, which is succinctly, expressed in Tagore's statement about what is the need for this history. So it has to be scientific, and that should enable the masses to understand. Now, he said that connect with the poor and the marginal. So he goes on saying that if somebody is doing an ethnological research in an Adivasi community, then what good it is going to have for that community? So there are these kinds of questions. So the simple thing I want to convey is that the kind of work which Dalit Bandhu has done, whether it is on Pule Lehla or various other kinds of historical developments in Travancore, where he actually talks about, if you read these books, you will know that this is a historical practice which was connecting Dalit Bandhu with the poor and the marginal. So you see, in different cultural linguistic contexts of India, at not very great distance of time, we find this concern with history as a public good. This is what I am saying. So therefore you have this, so the idea is to talk about history as something really serious. You want to connect yourself with the poor and the marginal, but then you cannot say goodbye to the idea of scientific history, because in the classrooms, in the university context, we still do our business with Leopold von Ranke. So this is what we begin to do. So therefore, we cannot say goodbye to this whole idea of scientific claim that history could make. Then if it becomes a public good, the history faced crisis, and that was connected with the mass politics that emerged. This is the argument. The mass politics, 1920s, 30s, we know that it's the time of International Congress under Mahatma Gandhi. Congress becoming a popular, the most popular sort of anti-colonial platform. And then it again goes along with the different kind of histories. In fact, I gave a couple of examples from Eastern and Western India where elites were writing histories. So those histories were contested. Like in Maharashtra, this contest was quite interesting. When Shivaji's history was written, people began to think that how can a Brahmin historian write about Shivaji, who was uplifted as to a Kshatriya status and so on through ritual purification, etc. Then when history is written, then naturally there could be bias of Brahmins, because one of those biographies said that, there is some kind of doubt about the paternity of this man, whether he was son of a Brahmin. So these were the kind of debate of that time. And then people thought that is an affront on the the pride of the Marathas. In fact, we can say this here in this part of the world, but not perhaps in any of the small towns or universities in Maharashtra now, because we know what happened the other day in Pune University. So therefore, the idea is that some of these histories that we talk about today, when it travels back to the public, it becomes, even as they are scientific histories, they could become really problematic. So, so there's a very curious connection between history and Indian democracy. That's where the real challenge comes in. Now, so think about many of these contemporary challenges. The article in question of Deepesh Chakrabarty was a 2008 one, and now it has become really problematic, because if you read this, you will see that many of those sentences are very prophetic in nature, because we live in a situation now, many of those apprehensions have become really, larger than life kind of figures, looming large, raining havoc on people in various parts of India. So that is the power of history that we realize today, that we experience now. So therefore, let us ask this question of history and Indian democracy. What happens to that? Now here I think, this is a kind of fear that people had expressed. Those who were votaries of scientific history, they thought that national public, as it emerges, there will be an erosion of scientific history. That's a very important point. Within the existing 10 minutes, I will try to develop some of my own arguments, although I just used the masters in the field. So let us see how in our own context we can think about it. Do we really think that when masses come to politics, as they demand their own history, as in the case of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, which I recall, he was from the elite community, but early 20th century here in Travancore, Paigil Johanna, when he talks about Kanandila Raksharagam, he is from the subaltern. Now we have N.K. Josar talking about a different kind of history. He talks about quite a number of, unknown, unknown in the sense that quote unquote, figures of history. So we have our colleagues here who have been writing about, Ajay Shekhar is here, Arattukuda Velayathu Panikka. And we have Dalit Bandhus writing about this, and quite a number of similar events, individuals, etc., who were forgotten figures in a way, but being revived. So therefore, this happens in the context of mass politics. So in the context of mass politics, masses really need history. That is where it happens. So this is something which really we need to discuss. Even as we go out of this hall, we need to know how far this mass politics demands certain kind of history. You have community histories, caste histories, etc. But actually, the demand for caste histories came not from this oppressed caste actually. If you really go into the genealogy of that, as I said in the case of Maratha or the Eastern Indian case, we find that it actually comes from the cravings of the upper caste, and some of those castes that really demanded that were upwardly mobile and demanding Kshatriya status. They wanted their kind of histories to buttress their social position of dominance. So therefore, you find a very interesting kind of connect between social position and history. So this is a point which we need to really think further about. What happens to history in that case? So here I give a few examples. Like in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, that time, there you find all this demand for Pakistan, then the rise of Hindu Mahasabha, subsequently the RSS and so on, kind of histories have been produced. Then you have this iconic clashes between the upper caste and lower caste taking place in many parts of India. And then, in South India, we have this Brahmin, non-Brahmin, and we have been enlightened in this by the late Professor Pandian in his interesting book on Brahmin, non-Brahmin. And about Western India, we have a lot of people who try to write about those histories for Maratha region. Holy Johann and many others who wrote about the movements of the Bahujans in that area. So we really need to think about this sort of identities, regional identities, caste identities, etc. So what happens to those identities as a matter of immediate concern at that point of time? Now I just drew a couple of examples like this Dalit Bahujan argument of Kanja Ilaya, Badri Narayan, etc. So they all have this real immediate political context. Ilaya's case, I request the students of history to read that Subaltern Studies Volume 9 article of him. I don't have time to just go into his argument. But the point is simple. So he wanted to write a history which is absolutely against the history of the dominant historians, including that of Subaltern Studies scholars. He said he is not going to really footnote his articles. In fact, if your professors, I'm telling students here, if you write something, all your professors will ask you to give proper footnotes. I also say that Ilaya said, what nonsense you are asking me. I don't have any footnotes, nothing. I heard this from my mother. So I cannot ask my mother which book you read to give this. So you get lost with your this. And in fact, Devar Chakravarti verbatim reproduced this in many other contexts actually. I have read it in 3-4 occasions where Chakrabarti actually talked about this. He said that, well, it was really difficult for them to convince even a person like, very big taskmasters like the late professor, the founding figures of the Subaltern Studies, Ranajit Guha, that look, here is an article without any footnotes. So that, no. So here is another kind of history that is being written, and this is it scientific history, but it is very much a public history. So I just invite your attention to that. And then we have Badri Narayan in the context of UP politics, BSP, talking about Uddha Devi and many other figures, And Mayavadi becomes another figure. And now Janaki Nayar interestingly argued that here you don't have a feminine figure, in fact, in the North Indian case, but you really need a very powerful woman who can challenge the male bastions. So the different kind of iconography was invented. And in fact, I just, maybe I have only 5 minutes now. So I still remember once I asked Gyan Pandey about this, because these are people from Uttar Pradesh and sort of radical historians. I wanted to ask him how he thought about Mayavadi and his politics. That was a time when actually Mayavadi was embroiled in a great deal of this corruption charges and so on. Then Gyan told me a very interesting thing. I never knew this. So Gyan said, well, this situation in UP was such that, nobody dared to challenge the caste hegemony of that area. And then you have a different person in Mayavadi who really did that. And that is what actually created the situation of this huge statues, including statues of herself. So there is a great symbolic war taking place in the Hindi heartland. And many of our friends now writing Dalit histories from North India, I know them very closely, many of these friends, not just from India, those colleagues from US and Europe, doing this kind of research, with whom I do really interact a lot. Because I understand this North Indian reality through these writings. As we sit in Kerala and do this work, we don't really grasp the kind of situation taking place. In this kind of public sphere, say for example the writings on Hindi public sphere, etc., that will take us to a different direction. I'm not going into that. So we have this different kind of identities and histories in conflict. Now take this idea to the writings of Dalit Bandhus, for example, to see Sitara has said about this sort of Savarna Malayali identity being undermined in these writings. So that's a very important point. And now, did it receive welcome in the classrooms? This is a question. What about the public domain? Even in the public domain, it did not, I think so. Because it took a long time for this sort of historiographies to develop in that way. So the idea is to ask. So I don't have much time. So in the case of Dalit Bandhus histories, was he thinking along with Dalits or for Dalits? This is a question that as historians, students of history, researchers, we need to ask. And I guess probably he was thinking along with, or he would be at home with this idea that he was thinking along with. So, you see, now this whole idea of Renaissance, Sitara referred to that. We know that much of it is a hoax, and in fact, in Dalavakulam, towards the end of that book, he actually talks about it. However stupid this argument, or how stupid this argument has been in the context of Kerala. Well, I don't have time to go into that. This whole thing is that some of these caste reform movements, particularly that of the upper caste, have been characterized as Renaissance movement. But anyway, among historians, this is a big debate. Unfortunately, that debate never took place in Kerala. So among Indian historians, it was a big debate in the 1970s about this question of Renaissance. And I still remember one very important book which was edited by V.C. Joshi, Rammohan Roy and the Process of Modernization. This is a classic text where all these debates have been brought together. Published by Vigas, I guess, but it was done by Thinmurthy. Well, in the Malayalam public sphere, I always thought that this is a very truncated kind of debate. People never understood what sort of things were happening. And the Malayalam പറയാൻ സുഖമാണ് അവസാനം എന്നുള്ളത് ഒരു പായസം കുടിച്ച ഇഫക്റ്റ് ആയിരിക്കും മിക്കവാറും രാഷ്ട്രീയക്കാർക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും ഉണ്ടാകാമെന്നാണ്. But for us, researchers in history, it raises quite a number of questions. It doesn't solve any problems. That's what I think. So therefore, you see, Renaissance movement ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ഈ അമ്പലം പണിയാൻ പൈസ കൊടുക്കാനായിട്ടൊരു മാനക്കേടോ നാണമോ ഇല്ല എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. So think about all this. Anyway, so what happens when the public histories are produced? So I just say, talk about read the biographies written or the event histories written. So we have a variety of public histories of that kind. So therefore, the question here is, we cannot conclude this because it's an ongoing dialogue. And therefore, the whole idea is that in the context of India, public history has become really problematic. And an academic historian, so this is what, even as some sections of that thought that, well, such a history should really exist. Even Dipesh Chakrabarty says there should be certain universals with which we can write history. So history really needs certain kind of universals. I also really think that if we leave out all the universals that connect us, I don't think any humanistic inquiry will be there. Relativism, okay, good, but then after a point it will not work. I don't know how far I'm making an argument. But the point is, for historians, certain universals should definitely be there. public good is important, ethical commitments are important, certain kind of moral, academic freedom, judgment, all of these things should be there. And the kind of public histories that are being snatched off from academic historians by the state and those who are street smart politicians, they don't bother about this. So therefore, such histories are sure way to doomsday. So that's what is happening. But then, what happens to a dialogic kind of process through which history is written? Can we just salvage this scientific history? These are questions. I don't have any answers, as many of us may not have answers. So in our collective inquiry, we need to think about the universals with which history could be written, and that could be something at the time of the Anthropocene, the debate in that area. People would say that, you see, look at this environmental crisis that we are all facing, which demands that there should be still universals of a different kind. And now Nair ends her article by saying that still there is this need for a certain kind of redemptive history, but the point is that it's a very long argument, I don't have time to really summarize. The point is to see that we really need to think about the small terrain of academic history. So we need to, it's not protecting that. So that's a show of, that is the ground upon which we really need to stand, and then think about what historians can do. And now in this textbook debate, so there are a lot of other scholars involved. And I quote Niladri Bhattacharya, who said that what is required is to train students in the classrooms to think critically. Now that is more important because history, as Dibesh Chakrabarti said, the history wars, this is a term which he had used, cannot be really fought. Definitely all these battles are to be fought. So, but then where the criticality is the most significant thing, that we teach students, this is in the context of the textbook debate, NCERT textbook debate. So, how history is actually created, or how history is written, the work of the historians, the craft of the historians, the historian's craft, if we want to recall that classic term. So that's where the whole thing. So we need to really teach students this process of writing history. And now here, as we look at the writings of Dalit Bandhus, does it open up? Do we have a window of opportunity to look at how at least? Much of it is on Kerala, but of course it is not just on Kerala. We have a lot of works dealing with nationalism, India, or say his own, the most recent one on Vivekananda and all that. So it is not just about Kerala alone, but to see that the criticality that he had introduced in history writing, I guess actually helps to start a communication with a kind of dialogue with other sort of historiographies, and I think that's where I stand. Thank you very much.